Hello, everybody. This is Mike History 2, and this is Joseph Stalin versus Leon Trotsky, Part 9, I believe. So, in May to June 1918, the Czechoslovak legions going from European Russia to Vladivostok rose against the Russian government. This left the Bolsheviks with the loss of most of the country's territory, an increasingly well organized resistance by anti communist Russians, and widespread defection by the military experts whom Trotsky relied on. Trotsky and the government responded with a full-fledged mobilization, which increased the size of the Red Army from fewer than 300,000 in May 1918 to 1 million in October, and an introduction of political commissars into the army. Their job was to ensure the loyalty of military experts and co-signing their orders. In response to Fania Kaplan's failed assassination of Lenin on August 30th, 1918, and to the successful assassination of the Petrograd All-Russian Extraordinary Commission's chief, Moisei Uritsky, on August 17, 1918, the Bolsheviks told Felix Dzerzhinsky to start a Red Terror on September 1st, 1918. Given the lack of manpower in the 16 armies that they were fighting, Trotsky insisted on the use of former Tsarist officers as military specialists within the Red Army, in combination with Bolshevik political commissars to ensure the revolutionary nature of the Red Army. September 1918, the Bolshevik government, facing continuous military difficulties, declared martial law and reorganized the Red Army. The position of commander-in-chief was restored, filled by Jukums Vasietis, who had formerly led the Eastern Front against the Czechoslovak legions. Vatsietis took charge of day-to-day operations of the army, while Trotsky became chairman of the newly formed Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic and retained overall control of the military. Throughout late 1918 and early 1919, there were a number of attacks on Trotsky's leadership of the Red Army, including veiled accusations in newspaper articles inspired by, you guessed it, Stalin, and a direct attack by the military opposition at the Eighth Party Congress in March 1919. In mid-1919, the dissatisfied had an opportunity to mount a serious challenge to Trotsky's leadership because the Red Army grew from 800,000 to 3 million and was fighting on 16 fronts. The Red Army had defeated the White Army's spring offensive in the east and was about to cross the Ural Mountains and enter Siberia in pursuit of Alexander Kolchak's forces. But in the south, Anton Denikin's White Russian forces advanced, and the situation deteriorated rapidly. On June 6th, Jukums Vasietis ordered the Eastern Front to stop the offensive so that he could use its forces in the south. But the leadership of the Eastern Front protested and wanted to keep the emphasis on the Eastern Front. They insisted that it was vital to capture Siberia before the onset of winter, which, makes sense because it's Siberia, and that once Kolchak's forces were broken, many more soldiers would be freed up for the Southern Front. Trotsky agreed with Vasietis. At the July 3rd to 4th Central Committee meeting, the majority supported Kamenev and Smilga against Vasietis and Trotsky. Trotsky's plan was rejected, and he was criticized for various alleged shortcomings in his leadership style, most of it on a personal nature. Now, of course, Stalin, again, used this opportunity to pressure Lenin to dismiss Trotsky from his post. But when Trotsky offered his resignation on July 5th, the Politburo and the Organizational Bureau of the Central Committee rejected it, and all this lame bureaucratic stuff. Now, however, some changes to the leadership of the Red Army were made. Trotsky was temporarily sent to the Southern Front. Most members of the Revolutionary Military Council who were not involved in its day-to-day operations were relieved of their duties on July 8th, and new members were added. The same day, while Trotsky was in the south, Vasietis was suddenly arrested by the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission on suspicion of involvement in an anti-communist plot and replaced by Sergei Kamenev. After a few weeks in the south, Trotsky returned to Moscow and resumed control of the Red Army. By October 1919, the government was in the worst crisis of the Civil War. Denikin's troops approached Tula and Moscow from the south, and Nikolai Yudenich's troops approached Petrograd from the west. Lenin decided that since it was more important to defend Moscow, Petrograd would have to be abandoned. Now, Trotsky argued that Petrograd needed to be defended, at least in part to prevent Estonia and Finland from intervening. Now, in a rare reversal, Trotsky was actually supported by Stalin and Zinoviev and prevailed against Lenin in the Central Committee. He immediately went to Petrograd, whose leadership, headed by Zinoviev, he found demoralized, and organized its defense. By October 22nd, the Red Army was on the offensive, and in early November, Yudenich's troops were driven back to Estonia, where they were disarmed and arrested. With the defeat of Denikin and Yudenich in late 1919, the Russian government's emphasis shifted to the economy. Trotsky spent the winter of 1919 to 1920 in the Urals region trying to restart its economy. Based on his experiences, he proposed abandoning the policies of war communism, which included confiscating grain from peasants and partially restoring the grain market. Still committed to war communism, Lenin rejected his proposal. It was not until early 1921, due to economic collapse and social uprisings, that Lenin and the rest of the Bolshevik leadership abandoned war communism in favor of the new economic policy, which shows that, yeah, once again, communism never works in real life. Now, in early 1920s, Soviet-Polish tensions eventually led to the Polish-Soviet War. In the run-up and during the war, Trotsky argued that the Red Army was exhausted and the Soviet government should sign a peace treaty with Poland as soon as possible. He did not believe that the Red Army would find much support in Poland. The Red Army was defeated by Poland, and the offensive was turned back during the Battle of Warsaw in August 1920, in part because of, you guessed it again, Stalin's failure to obey Trotsky's orders. Back in Moscow, Trotsky argued again for a peace treaty, and this time he succeeded. In late 1921, Lenin's health deteriorated and he was absent from Moscow for longer periods of time. He had 3 strokes between May 25, 1922 and March 9, 1923, which caused paralysis, loss of speech, and finally death on January 21st, 1924. And yeah, you will not be missed, Lenin. Now, with Lenin increasingly unimportant throughout 1922, Stalin was the general secretary of the Central Committee, and Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev became part of the triumvirate formed by Stalin to ensure that Trotsky, who was the number 2 man in the country in Lenin's era, would not succeed him. Now, the rest of the recently expanded Politburo was at first uncommitted but eventually joined the triumvirate. From then until his final stroke, Lenin spent much of his time trying to find a way to prevent a split within the Communist Party leadership. In late 1922, Trotsky secured an alliance with Lenin against Stalin. Stalin had recently engineered the creation of the Soviet Union and further centralized state control. Now, the alliance proved effective on the issue of foreign trade, but this was hindered by Lenin's illness. In January 1923, Lenin amended his testament to suggest that Stalin should be removed as the party's general secretary, while also mildly criticizing Trotsky and other Bolshevik leaders. The relationship between Stalin and Lenin had broken down completely by this time, as was demonstrated during an event when Stalin insulted Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, and if you guys watch my older videos, then yeah, you'll remember that. So in March 1923, days before his third stroke, Lenin asked Trotsky to denounce Stalin at the 12th Party Congress. Now, at that Congress in April 1923, however, just after Lenin's final stroke, Trotsky did not denounce him. Instead, he made a speech about party democracy, as if that even exists, while avoiding any direct confrontation of the triumvirate. Stalin had prepared for the Congress by replacing many local party delegates with those loyal to him, mostly at the expense of Zinoviev and Kamenev's supporters. Stalin delivered the key reports on organizational structure and questions of nationality, while Zinoviev delivered the Central Committee political report, which was usually Lenin's job. Now, among the resolutions adopted were those calling for greater democracy within the party, because we all know that communists are very democratic, but these were vague and, as you can expect, never happened. Now, starting in mid-1923, the Soviet economy, ran into significant difficulties. Who saw that coming? Which led to numerous strikes countrywide. Now, 2 secret groups within the Communist Party were uncovered and suppressed by Soviet secret police. On October 8, 1923, Trotsky sent a letter to the Central Committee and the Central Control Commission because, of course, all these annoying committee names, attributing these difficulties to lack of party democracy. Now, immediately after the conference, Trotsky left for a Caucasian resort to recover from his illness. Because, equality. Now, on his way, he learned about Lenin's death on January 21st, 1924. He was about to return when a telegram from Stalin arrived giving an incorrect date of the funeral, which would have made it impossible for Trotsky to return in time. Now, Stalin used this opportunity to weaken Trotsky by purging all his followers and removing them from their offices. Now, there was little open political disagreement within the Soviet leadership throughout most of 1924. On the surface, Trotsky remained the most prominent and popular Bolshevik leader. Behind the scenes, he was completely cut off from the decision-making process since most of his followers had been purged the year before. Politburo meetings were pure formalities since all the key decisions were made ahead of time by the triumvirate and its supporters. Now, Trotsky also lost control over the military. In the meantime, the triumvirate finally broke up. The struggle became open at the September 1925 meeting of the Central Committee and came to a head at the 14th Party Congress in December 1925. Now, Zinoviev and Kamenev formed the new opposition but were defeated, while Trotsky refused to get involved in the fight and did not speak in the Congress. In early 1926, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and their supporters in the new opposition gravitated closer to Trotsky supporters, and the two groups soon formed an alliance, which also incorporated some smaller opposition groups within the Communist Party, and this alliance became known as the United Opposition. Now, it was repeatedly threatened with sanctions by the Stalinist leadership of the Communist Party, and Trotsky had to agree to tactical retreats, mostly to preserve his alliance with Zinoviev and Kamenev. Now, the opposition remained united against Stalin throughout 1926 and 1927, especially on the issue of the Chinese Revolution. The methods used by the Stalinists against the opposition became more and more extreme, and at the 15th Party Congress in October 1926, Trotsky could barely speak, and at the end of the conference lost his Politburo seat. Now, in 1927, Stalin started using the State Political Directorate, which was a secret police, to infiltrate and discredit the opposition, and oppositionists were increasingly harassed, sometimes expelled from the party, and even arrested. Now that's all. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time.